In March 44 BC, Rome, the illustrious capital of the ancient world, was gripped by turmoil. The assassination of Julius Caesar, the most influential dictator in history, orchestrated by a conspiracy among his closest senators, plunged the city into a state of profound uncertainty. Anxiety permeated Rome's cobbled streets, and no one could foresee the future, not even those who had committed the heinous act. At the heart of this chaos, a young Octavian, barely 18 years old, received news that would forever alter his destiny. As Caesar's great-nephew and adopted son, he was declared the sole heir to the dictator's vast fortune, his name, and, most crucially, his legacy. Yet, Rome did not yet know Octavian. Romans could not conceive that this inexperienced youth would become the architect of a transformation, turning a republic embroiled in strife into the greatest empire the world had ever seen. Thus begins the saga of Octavian Augustus, Rome's first and arguably most distinguished emperor. A man who reshaped the course of history, raising Rome from the ashes of civil wars. But he was also a figure whose actions were marked by betrayal, bloody conflicts, and ruthless decisions that impacted countless lives. He was hailed as a visionary and a generous ruler, yet others condemned him for his insatiable ambition and mercilessness. Today, we embark on a journey to explore Augustus's life, to understand what made him one of the most complex and controversial leaders ever to stand at Rome's helm. Rome, the Eternal City, became the stage for tragic events on March 15, 44 BC, repercussions of which echoed through the centuries. At the very heart of power, in the Senate House, illuminated by the flickering flames of torches, a conspiracy unfolded designed to end the life of Julius Caesar, a man whose genius and ambition had transformed Rome from a republic into a mighty global power. The senators, once proud of their principles of collegial governance, now felt the suffocating grip of absolute power in the hands of one man, and their discontent reached a boiling point. But what happens when such a colossal figure as Caesar departs? How could a city, whose foundations had for centuries rested upon republican ideals, find its way after the loss of a leader who seemed to hold the fate of the entire state in his hands? Rome plunged into chaos, torn apart by a power struggle among those who, only yesterday, had sworn allegiance to the fallen dictator. And at this moment of universal uncertainty, an unexpected claimant to leadership appeared on the political scene: Octavian, Caesar's young, 18-year-old great-nephew and adopted son. At this point, the young Octavian was virtually unknown to the wider public. Unlike renowned generals or seasoned politicians such as Mark Antony, Octavian had neither glorious victories nor political experience to his name. He was merely a teenager, suddenly confronted with the greatest challenge imaginable: to inherit an empire built by his adoptive father, Julius Caesar. The era following Julius Caesar's death was not merely marked by a redistribution of economic assets. As heir, Octavian received something far more significant than gold and land. He inherited Caesar's name, a symbol of greatness and boundless power. In the eyes of Roman society, however, he remained an inexperienced youth, a figure easily manipulated. How could Octavian overcome this prejudice and assert himself in such a challenging environment? Despite widespread skepticism, Octavian decided to take into his own hands not only his uncle's financial inheritance, but also his own unpredictable destiny. While Rome was in a state of political turbulence, attempting to comprehend the consequences of Caesar's death, Octavian journeyed to the Eternal City, determined to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. But along with power, he inherited a deeply fractured republic, where clashes of interest seemed inevitable. Thus begins the narrative of a little-known young man who, through strategic thinking, courage, and an ability to adapt to circumstances, was destined to become the most influential person of his time. Octavian not only weathered the turbulent waters of the Roman Civil War, but also brought about revolutionary changes in the world's political system, leaving an indelible mark on history. In 43 BC, the Roman Republic stood on the cusp of change, as the young Octavian, unexpectedly to many, became the heir of the great Julius Caesar. However, a mere will proved insufficient to earn universal recognition and establish himself as the legitimate successor. In this city, where intrigues and betrayals were commonplace, and influential figures such as Mark Antony and members of the Senate watched his ascent with suspicion, Octavian realized a simple yet crucial truth: power is not inherited, it must be seized. Despite the skepticism of the Roman aristocracy, who doubted his ability to govern the state, Octavian decided to act immediately. Caesar's legacy appeared to him not only as a source of financial prosperity, but also as a powerful tool for achieving political dominance, which he still had to earn. However, the Roman political arena was renowned for its complexity and treachery. Mark Antony, Caesar's closest confidant and former ally, also aspired to absolute power, transforming their rivalry into the central confrontation that would define Rome's future. In turn, the Roman Senate, fearing the concentration of power in the hands of one man, devised a complex and risky plan. The senators intended to make Octavian a public figure, a symbol of authority, but without real control over the state. True power, in their design, was to remain with the Senate. This move seemed sensible and safe to them, yet they made a grave error, underestimating Octavian's ambition and resolve, as he had no intention of being a puppet in their hands. Far from his predetermined fate as a puppet, the young Octavian displayed remarkable political acumen, skillfully reshuffling alliances in his favor. Surrounding himself with loyal supporters, he began to deftly wield Caesar's name, transforming it into a potent weapon. But that was not all. In his youth, Octavian proceeded to raise his own army, assuming command of Roman legions and demonstrating an unexpected ability to win battles, which surprised many. Early clashes with Mark Antony plunged Octavian into the very heart of Rome's political storm. Having prevailed over Antony's forces in 2 fateful battles, Octavian returned triumphantly to Rome, encircled by the glory of a victorious general. What might have seemed a mere coincidence was, in reality, the beginning of a meticulously planned strategy. Securing the support of the Senate and the trust of the citizens, who saw him as their savior, Octavian not only gained legitimate authority, but also began to be perceived as a leader with an undeniable right to rule. Nevertheless, rivals still hungry for power remained in Rome. Antony, still alive, posed a serious threat, but Octavian had already begun weaving a web of alliances, and was ready to eliminate anyone who dared to stand in his way without hesitation. In the brutal world of Roman politics, betrayal and the struggle for survival became an integral part of a dangerous game. Thus, the young Octavian, who arrived in Rome seemingly with only a famous name, began his unwavering path to absolute power. However, this path was far from easy. In an environment where loyalty was fleeting and ambition knew no bounds, Octavian gradually transformed into a figure who concentrated immense power in his hands. He was no longer just Caesar's adopted son, but a man who embodied the future of Rome. In 43 BC, Rome became an arena of political intrigue and power struggles. Octavian, demonstrating remarkable leadership qualities and strategic thinking, realized the necessity of solidifying his position. He understood that to achieve absolute power, he would require reliable allies. It was then that Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus united their efforts, forming the Second Triumvirate, an alliance aimed at establishing control over Rome and eliminating all political opponents. This triumvirate was not merely a formal agreement on the division of power, but a well-conceived tactical move, directed at the ruthless suppression of any resistance. In conditions of political instability, where loyalty was easily bought and sold, the triumvirs decided to act decisively, destroying all who posed a threat to their rule. Thus began the era of the Roman proscriptions. Armed with lists of enemies, the triumvirs unleashed a wave of mass executions and exiles. Approximately 300 senators and numerous other political opponents, who represented a potential threat to their power, were ruthlessly eliminated. The Roman Republic, already exhausted by years of conflict and corruption, found itself buried under the weight of this political revolution. However, the proscriptions were not limited solely to members of the senatorial class. In an era of upheaval and political intrigue, as the Roman Republic stood on the brink of transformation, proscriptions became a sinister instrument in the hands of ambitious politicians. Mark Antony, striving for absolute power and seeking to neutralize any potential threats, resorted to this cruel measure, which inevitably led to an escalation of tension in his relationship with Octavian. Once allies, they now increasingly diverged in their political views and ambitions. Antony, blinded by the thirst for power, aroused growing suspicion in Octavian, who realized that trusting him was becoming increasingly risky. The tension between the two influential figures steadily mounted, foreshadowing an inevitable clash and a new wave of civil war. While Antony wove his intrigues, Octavian did not shy away from the struggle for power. Possessing control over the army, he methodically consolidated his position in Rome. Personally leading military campaigns, he demonstrated his leadership qualities, crushing the last pockets of Republican resistance. The war for Rome became a matter of survival, and Octavian, despite his youth, understood that his future depended directly on his ability to crush his enemies and retain power. However, he realized, purges alone would not be enough to achieve his ambitious goals. Octavian, driven by a grand dream, sought not merely to survive the political struggle but to transform Rome into a mighty empire. The Roman Republic, though it retained the semblance of life, was in its twilight. Ahead lay a titanic battle between Octavian and Mark Antony, the outcome of which would determine Rome's future and establish a sole ruler. In 31 BC, a battle unfolded off the coast of Actium, one that would determine the future destiny of the Roman Empire. Here, Octavian and Mark Antony met in a decisive confrontation, where at stake was not only military might but also the future of the state. After long years of political intrigue, alliances, and betrayals, a large-scale culmination of the conflict was inevitable. Mark Antony, possessing a formidable army and the support of Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, entered into opposition with Octavian, who by then commanded Rome's most powerful army. The Battle of Actium was not merely a clash of armed forces, but a confrontation of ideologies. Mark Antony, embodying the Rome of the past, sought to revive its greatness through an alliance with Egypt and the realization of Eastern ambitions. He was opposed by Octavian, the embodiment of imperial Rome, aiming to strengthen his power and establish a new order under his sole control. Both leaders prepared for a decisive confrontation both on land and at sea, where the Roman fleets were to meet in direct combat. Despite Antony's promises to restore Rome's former glory and establish his own dynasty, Octavian understood that he could not allow his rival to retain control over the wealth and might of Egypt, which were necessary to maintain Rome's dominance. The Battle of Actium was not only a matter of armies, but a strategic confrontation. Octavian fought not just for military victory, but for Rome's legacy, seeking to determine its future path. The Roman Empire stood on the brink of change. In a fateful battle, Mark Antony and Cleopatra, striving for triumph, deployed their formidable fleet and the untold riches of Egypt. However, Octavian, demonstrating strategic foresight, managed to turn the tide. Marcus Agrippa, a talented general loyal to Octavian, played a decisive role in this triumph, inflicting a crushing defeat on Antony's forces in a skillfully planned battle. The rout of Mark Antony and Cleopatra proved a fatal blow. They were forced to flee to Egypt, while Octavian rejoiced, celebrating an undisputed victory. Egypt, once a powerful kingdom, came under Roman control. Cleopatra, realizing the collapse of her empire, chose death over dishonor. Mark Antony, once an influential leader, the second man in Rome, took his own life, leaving Octavian as the sole ruler of Rome. Thanks to this victory, Octavian firmly consolidated his power over the Roman Empire, eliminating all rivals and strengthening his position. The era of civil wars came to an end, and Rome prepared to enter a new era under the banner of Empire. Pax Romana, long-awaited peace and prosperity, was approaching. The victory at Actium marked the unification of Rome under one leader. Octavian, Julius Caesar's young heir, had achieved what seemed impossible. He had become the most powerful man in Rome. The fate of the empire was now in his hands, but new challenges lay before him. Octavian had to solidify his power and implement reforms to ensure his reign would be an era of prosperity and greatness for Rome. Upon his return to the Eternal City, the atmosphere remained highly charged. Romans, raised in the spirit of republican ideals, were not yet ready to bow before a sole ruler. Octavian, a shrewd politician, understood this and demonstrated remarkable cunning. Unlike his adoptive father, who had openly proclaimed himself dictator, Octavian adopted the title of princeps, meaning first among equals. This title, though largely symbolic, allowed him to gradually consolidate his power without arousing undue suspicion among the populace. In essence, Octavian did everything possible to avoid giving the impression of a dictator, striving for a softer, more gradual transition of power. For Rome, exhausted by internal strife and bloody civil wars, this came as a true relief. Octavian, acting as a reformer, offered a moderate yet centralized authority that promised future peace and prosperity. He brought the long-awaited stability that the Republic, worn out by decades of conflict, could no longer provide. However, an even grander scheme was brewing in Octavian's mind. He understood that Rome needed a profound transformation. Octavian aspired not merely to go down in history as a successful ruler. He dreamt of being remembered by posterity as the man who created the great Roman Empire. Entering history, Octavian unveiled a grand plan of transformation. For him, the resurgence of Rome's power was not just about military triumphs, but also the creation of a new, even more magnificent capital. Under his leadership, Rome was transformed from a city of brick into a glittering marble metropolis, a symbol of power and grandeur. Thus began the era of Pax Romana, a period of peace and prosperity. Octavian invested vast sums into infrastructure development, erecting temples, aqueducts, and theaters. The city flourished, and trade prospered under the protection of peace. The Roman economy reached unprecedented heights. Particular attention was paid to shaping the image of the ruler. Sculptures, busts, and coins bearing his likeness were disseminated throughout the empire, creating an omnipresent cult of personality. Gradually, Octavian was bestowed with the title of Augustus, meaning the revered one, and one of the months of the year was named after him, symbolizing his significance to Rome. In fact, having concentrated control over the army, politics, and economy in his hands, Octavian became the sole ruler, while maintaining the appearance of republican institutions. He skillfully manipulated public opinion, ensuring stable and effective governance, while avoiding accusations of dictatorship. Over time, Augustus laid the foundation for an imperial dynasty. His life's journey demonstrates how ambition, strategic thinking, and political acumen can transform a young heir into the founder of the Roman Empire, who secured 200 years of prosperity. After long years of bloody civil wars and betrayals, when the Roman Empire teetered on the brink of collapse, Augustus faced a colossal task: establishing lasting peace in Rome. The cherished dream of Pax Romana, the Roman peace, was not merely Augustus's personal aspiration, but a vital necessity for the empire's preservation. In 27 BC, after eliminating political rivals and establishing sole rule, Augustus embarked on sweeping reforms aimed not only at ensuring internal tranquility, but also at fundamentally restructuring Rome's political, military, and social fabric. Through these transformations, Augustus sought not only to pacify Rome, but also to extend the empire's influence across the known world. Pax Romana was not a brief respite, but a concept that defined an era of unprecedented stability and prosperity, during which the Roman Empire reached the zenith of its power. Augustus achieved peace not only through military might, but also through skillful diplomacy. The empire's borders were strengthened, Roman legions were reorganized and became more efficient, and provinces were granted relative autonomy under Roman control. The centralization of power, despite its absolute nature, manifested not as tyranny but as wise governance, fostering unity and general well-being. The era of Pax Romana was not a mere lull on the empire's frontiers. Rome experienced an unprecedented internal resurgence, marked by expanding trade links and revitalized trade routes. Infrastructure development reached unparalleled scales. New aqueducts, bridges, roads, and public buildings were constructed, and museums, theaters, and libraries not only transformed the city's appearance, but also served to strengthen Roman culture. Rome became the epicenter of the known world, an imperial capital welcoming peoples from across the globe, from the Iberian Peninsula to Asia Minor. Trade relations with the Far East rapidly developed, and the safety of maritime routes in the Mediterranean reached an unprecedented level, fostering a vibrant exchange of goods, ideas, and cultural values. Under Augustus's wise rule, Rome became the economic, political, and cultural hub of the world. No less significant was the social progress achieved during this era. Unlike the times of the Roman Republic, marked by social inequality, Augustus sought to reform the social structure, upholding respect for Roman traditions while simultaneously stimulating a new vision for the future. Laws were enacted aimed at strengthening public morality and encouraging marriage and childbirth in line with Roman values, in an attempt to rebuild a society weakened by decades of bloody wars. This allowed for the creation of a solid foundation for the prosperity of Roman citizens. Despite his seemingly unassailable position, Augustus remained highly active. He guaranteed peace and order in the state, relying on his formidable military might. Early in his reign, he launched a series of successful military campaigns aimed at expanding the empire's borders and defending strategically vital territories, such as the Germanic lands and the eastern provinces. Thanks to the Pax Romana, Roman citizens could enjoy life without fear of enemy invasions, which, in turn, stimulated a cultural flourishing. In the realm of art, Augustus actively supported the creation of monuments, sculptural works, and literary masterpieces, which became emblematic of the Roman Empire's grandeur. Under his patronage, eminent literary figures such as Virgil and Horace produced works that defined the trajectory of Roman literature for many years. Ultimately, Augustus left Rome more prosperous and powerful than it had been upon his ascension to power. The Roman peace, the Pax Romana, which lasted for almost 2 centuries, became an enduring legacy that cemented the Roman Empire's status as an invincible world power. Although his political methods often drew criticism, Augustus succeeded in ushering Rome into an era of unprecedented prosperity, going down in history as the founder of an empire who left an indelible mark on human history. Before Augustus's reign, Rome was a city deeply scarred by wars, with gaping holes from ruined buildings and a palpable lack of developed infrastructure. However, Augustus, endowed with far-sighted strategic thinking, understood that the greatness of Rome, which he sought to immortalize, needed to manifest not only in its military might but also in its outward appearance. Like an eminent architect, Augustus set about transforming the city into a tangible symbol of Roman power. Rome, exhausted by centuries of conflict, was reimagined by him from a progressive perspective and transformed into one of the ancient world's most impressive metropolises. His famous quote, "I found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble," vividly illustrates the scale of this extensive reconstruction. The construction of temples, theaters, aqueducts, roads, bridges, and markets became a paramount task for the new emperor. Establishing modern infrastructure was a key factor for Rome's economic, cultural, and political advancement. One of Augustus's most ambitious undertakings was the reconstruction of the Roman Forum, which served as the heart of the city's public life. Through a series of transformations, Augustus created a city that was not only functional but also aesthetically pleasing, where architectural structures conveyed both symbolic and practical significance. During his reign, particular attention was paid to restoring religious sites, which was evident in the construction or restoration of 82 temples dedicated to Roman deities. The Temple of Mars Ultor, triumphantly rising in the Forum to commemorate the victorious battles at Philippi, serves as a prime example of the architectural grandeur of that era. This edifice was not merely a place of worship, but also a visible embodiment of Augustus's power and legitimacy as the new ruler, endowed with divine status. Through these extensive projects, he sought to consolidate his power, bestow indisputable legitimacy upon his rule, and leave an indelible mark on the city's history. The restoration of aqueducts and the cleansing of the river Tiber were crucial steps towards improving the living conditions of the city's inhabitants. Supplying Rome with clean drinking water was a paramount task aimed at maintaining public health and laying a solid foundation for future prosperity. Furthermore, Augustus initiated the construction of theaters and public libraries, actively supporting the development of culture and art in a society that could now enjoy the fruits of long-awaited peace. One of the most significant achievements of his reign was the establishment of a fire service, vitally necessary for a rapidly growing city constantly at risk of devastating fires, especially in the central districts of Rome where wooden structures predominated. Octavian Augustus, who ruled Rome, possessed not only an aesthetic sensibility, but also a profound understanding of the great city's practical needs. He saw Rome not merely as the empire's capital, but as a complex mechanism requiring constant care and attention. Augustus, an outstanding general and political figure, also proved himself a talented urban planner. His transformations aimed at maintaining order and peace, as well as reinforcing the conviction that Rome was the heart of the civilized world. By meticulously caring for the city's architectural appearance, he created an image of Rome as a mighty capital that ruled the world with dignity and splendor. Augustus's colossal efforts laid a solid foundation for Rome's future development, and his architectural legacy continues to inspire admiration to this day. Many monuments, erected or reconstructed under his command, have withstood the test of time, profoundly influencing the urban environment and becoming an integral part of what we now call the Eternal City. Rome, 14 AD. Augustus, the man who transformed Rome from a war-weary republic into a prosperous and peaceful empire, approached the end of his life's journey. At the age of 76, his health began to deteriorate, and the approach of death became evident. However, despite his physical frailty, his legacy continued to live on and flourish. At a time when Rome was in the capable hands of his stepson, Tiberius, the empire's future seemed bright. Yet, deep down, Augustus understood that his departure from the political stage would mark the end of an era. In his final days, he gathered his closest family members and loyal friends around him. In the privacy of his room, surrounded by those who would inherit the reins of power, Augustus reflected on his life. With a touch of humility and profound satisfaction, he bid farewell to his colossal legacy, rightly expecting to be lauded and honored as the man who had saved Rome and transformed it into the greatest empire the world had ever known. "Since I have played my part well, I ask you all to applaud me," he uttered, making this final gesture of modesty, which reflected his deep sense of duty fulfilled towards Rome and its people. On August 19, 14 AD, Augustus peacefully passed away at his villa in Nola, surrounded by his loving wife, Livia. Despite having faced betrayals and numerous trials throughout his long years, his demise avoided the violent end that so often befell many Roman rulers. In his final moments, Augustus ensured the immortality of his legacy. Tiberius, his stepson and successor, inaugurated a new imperial dynasty, destined to remain in power for many generations, continuing Augustus's work and bolstering the greatness of the Roman Empire. Rome mourned the passing of its emperor, yet simultaneously celebrated his extraordinary life. Augustus had reached unprecedented heights, transforming the empire and leaving behind an invaluable legacy destined to endure for centuries. As a mark of profound recognition for his greatness, Augustus was deified after his death, and his image was forever enshrined as a symbol of power and unwavering stability. The emperor, who founded the Roman Empire and transformed Rome into the heart of a prosperous and peaceful world, left an indelible mark on history. His deified persona was elevated to the status of a Roman deity, which not only ensured his immortality but also served as a guiding light for future generations of emperors. In the ensuing decades, Rome continued its triumphant march under the leadership of his successors, yet the peace and stability established by Augustus were no longer taken for granted. Although his reign was fraught with challenges and required difficult decisions, it was precisely his foresight that enabled Rome to become the center of a global empire and one of the most powerful states in human history.